All right. Today is August 2nd, 2023. It's 1:30 p.m. This is the regular meeting of the Shawnee Planning Commission, and I call the meeting to order. May I have a roll call?
Barrett.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Palmer. Porter.
Here.
Reese.
Here.
Rowell.
Here.
Walker.
Here.
We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
We have a quorum. First item is consideration and approval of the minutes from the regular meeting of the Shawnee Planning Commission on July 5th, 2023. Are there any questions or corrections from the commissioners? If none, I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve. Have a roll call, please.
Barrett.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
Rowell.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Reese.
Aye.
Porter.
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. Next item is number 2, case number CUP 02-23, public hearing and consideration of a request for a conditional use permit for telecommunications housing on property located at 43003 East MacArthur Street. You have the staff report?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Rachel Klein, City Planner. This is a request for a conditional use permit for what we're calling telecommunications housing on property located at 43008 East MacArthur Street. At that particular location, there is currently a small engine repair shop, and the request is for telecommunications housing to be placed behind the building to the north. In easier to understand terms, and if you look at the pictures provided in your packet, they're small sheds. One is about 120 square feet, the second one being about 200 square feet, and will be in an area that is fenced off with the appropriate screening. This is a use that is allowed. We went with what we had, and communication towers was the closest, but staff felt this was a good one to use because the conditional use permit is required regardless of the zoning designation. The two companies that will be using the housing are Blue Peak and MBO Networks for fiber optic and television. And this is in compliance with the future land use map. And it is located in C3 zoning, which is Highway Commercial District. The proper notification for public hearing was served, and the application was reviewed, and there are conditions recommended. In addition, acknowledgement by the applicant that the approval of a conditional use permit does not negate or circumvent the other requirements of development as stated in city codes, which include the zoning code and the adopted building and fire codes. An acknowledgement by the applicant that additional permits may be required and standard inspections will be conducted. Based upon the findings, staff's recommendation is to recommend approval of CUP 0223 with the conditions listed. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for staff?
So maybe could you walk us through, there's on the recommendation options, it's the options, I'm sorry. Sorry, I'm catching up after having missed the last two meetings. I would draw that comment.
Any questions?
The height of the structures.
I believe about 9 feet is the height.
Single story.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
This case requires a public hearing, and so we will now open that public hearing. Is the applicant present?
Good afternoon.
If you'd come forward and sign in and give us your name.
My name is Donna Russell, and this is my husband, Tim. We're the applicants.
Okay. Do you have anything to add to the staff report?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
Yeah. The
Does anybody have any-
representatives from Blue Peak and MBO are here to answer any questions that
Okay.
you might have.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Do any commissioners have questions for the applicant or the providers? Okay, well, thank you. Is there anybody else here who wishes to speak? Okay. If seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Probably don't have any more questions for staff? Do you, Monty?
No.
Okay. So at this point, I will entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve case CUP 02-23 for approval and forwarding to the City Commission on August 21st.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Just confirm, is that with the conditions provided by staff?
With conditions provided by staff.
Thank you.
Still second.
Okay. And we have a roll call.
Reese.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
Rowell.
Aye.
Barrett.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Porter.
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. Motion passes. This application will be heard at the next City Commission meeting on August 21st, 2023 at 6 p.m. right here. The next item is number 3, Planning Commission Training Session, Part 3.
Thank you. So on this section, we're going to focus specifically on some advanced tools that planning commissions, planning staff will use. Some of these may be more applicable to where we're at, or could be more potentially viable options than others at different times. One of the key ones that gets used in this state specifically, as well as others, is tax increment financing. That's one that gets talked about a lot. Shawnee has 2 TIF districts in and around and are next to the downtown. Tax increment financing is authorized by the Oklahoma Local Development Act. It is essentially taking, in a Reader's Digest version, the difference or the increment in the pre and post-development tax that is generated and then applied to use. Typically, it is used for infrastructure, legal design, issues of that nature with developments. It is a tool used quite often by some communities more than others. It is not designed to force a project. It is designed essentially to use without this type of financing, the project would not necessarily go forward. So a but-for type of situation. As you can see on the slides, it can be used to remediate hazards, land acquisition, land clearance, infrastructure, anything related to development or things within the project plan designed for that TIF area. Specifically, to go back to that, when a TIF district is developed, there is a specific plan that goes into place that's approved by the community that adopts the TIF district. That plan is developed in consultation and reviewed by the Planning Commission as well as the governing body. It includes a number of activities that can be done. So in our TIF districts, it would depend on the writing. So infrastructure could be one. The streetscaping was one of the projects that was done in accordance with the TIF in downtown. So that was one of the eligible projects. Other projects that can be utilized within a TIF district, depending on how the TIF is written or the plan is written, building improvements, building rehab, facade rehab, streetscaping, infrastructure underground, things like that, or land acquisition, land clearing. Those are all activities that could be potentially done. And again, it all depends on how the TIF is developed and written. Some TIFs are developed in other states where a bond is taken out and then the TIF revenue is designed to pay that bond off. In Oklahoma, typically what you will see for many communities is the TIF is allowed to just accumulate revenue over time until it builds up to a certain point, and then it gets applied to certain projects, which is a more typical pattern of what you will see in this state. A tool that can be used in concert with that is a business improvement district, or BID. BID. Business improvement districts are essentially areas that property and or business owners come together and they decide to ask the city to levy an additional tax on those properties with a plan in mind. So again, it is approved by the governing body, but in this case, it is run by people from the area that benefit from the bid. So I will use an example. If you take a 20 square block area, and I'll use ones from Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City's downtown is its own business improvement district. They have their own governing board that basically approves the budget that the city council signs off on for the city of OKC. That would be the same case here. The business and property owners would band together, create a plan of action for a 5 or 10 year period, and they would list out the activities that would be supported by the revenue that's generated from the bid. So marketing operations, so if you want to hire staff to do trash cleanup, if you want to hire staff to do marketing, if you want to do some small capital projects like lighting or decorations, if you want to do things like some small scale improvements to buildings and help property owners, those are all activities you can do as part of the bid. But it's all designed within the scope of the BID when it's developed and sent to the city council or city commission for approval. You will see that done a lot to help maintain landscaping, streetscaping, lighting, but you will also see it done to do marketing, to have a staff, even if it's a part-time person for that commercial area, to have as a support, to keep in contact and keep the businesses organized. And that's, again, as a voluntary assessment that those building and business and property owners levy on themselves. So they re-up it, they petition the governing body for approval. Really, they drive the process. So it's one thing that a lot of commercial areas will use as a tool to help themselves. Some will use it to pay for ambassadors, so people to give directions and things like that, provide information. Some will even use it for security. Another tool that can be used, these start to get into lesser known or lesser used depending on the community, housing funds, and the idea of coordinating resources, leveraging and layering them. So housing, for example, low-income housing tax credits, which is the LIHTC, and then home funds, which is a program through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Those are two housing resources that can bring in potential developers to do housing that's targeted on below market rate or, again, low-income housing. It's a tax credit program. Home funds can be used for renovation. Home funds can also be used for new construction. How you focus your business retention and expansion plans and a true economic development strategy is another tool that communities find very useful. It helps them target specific things to go after, how they target their incentives, how they target their attraction and marketing. And it cuts through, for many communities, a lot of the time to really, instead of going after one thing or another, they're more focused on what they're doing and what they're looking for, and what they're looking to build. Another economic development tool is tourism. And that's where, for example, the Lake Master Plan can come into play, trying to develop those resources in a way that draws more people. Because when you get people coming from outside the community, you have the potential to generate additional revenue that may not already be there. Again, or also known as OPM, other people's money. Additional things that can be used as tools, historic preservation and preservation districts. So many communities are active in a historic preservation program, either helping designate properties or areas. You can do an individual property, or you can have an area designated. Some communities are active to the point they have a local landmark program and local landmark ordinance that will do a local designation as well as the state and federal designations. One thing that's been tried in other communities and at different times here is the Main Street program. That deals a lot not only with the physical infrastructure and the physical appearance, but also the marketing, the promotion, and the overall strategy for helping downtown commercial areas. There are ways you can use those concepts and do that type of work without being a full-blown Main Street community. For example, as part of a business improvement district, which we just mentioned, which is why I put it on that slide a second time. Code enforcement can be a tool to help deal with derelict properties. We've been, as a community, more active and more aggressive with that approach. The budget we have for this current fiscal year is an increase, I believe, of about $100,000 over the previous year. So we're trying to be more proactive. One of the other things we're instituting is some ways to help on a residential side deal with lien issues. And then a capital improvement plan, which the city has adopted for the first time in many years. Not only an actual strategy, but an actual capital improvement plan. That takes a long-term approach to our capital needs, whether it be infrastructure or equipment, and starts to pace out. The next evolution, I think, in that will be trying to tie additional grant sources to potential projects so that we are a little bit more organized and forward-thinking in how we approach grant writing and going after different grant programs. There's also non-federal funding, which Shawnee has been fortunate in some ways to utilize an array of resources. Foundations can be one. Different civic groups often come to the table. A number of businesses have their own foundations, and I'll use the example of Strickland Park up in Stillwater. Was partially funded. It's an inclusive playground that was rebuilt. Part of the funds utilized were community development block grants, but the State Farm Foundation also provided a grant for that project. And a number of state agencies have funding sources that are separate from the federal government that we can look at too. The most popular federal funding sources are listed on this slide. CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Funds, are the first one, and many people know about those because we talk about them at times here. As an entitlement community, we're unique in the fact that we get a pot of CDBG funds every year, roughly around $336,000 to $338,000. That can be used for a number of things that benefit low to moderate income households, and so that's the target as far as the main national objective. The other one that we focus on is the elimination of blight and substandard conditions. What does that mean specifically? Areas that need a substantial amount of TLC is a short answer. USDA rural development is another source of funding that we can use. They do a number of things for community facilities, but also for residential. Those are limited more for us because we are a community over 25,000, but there are some that we can still go after. Small Business Administration and Economic Development Administration are two other ones. Well used, lesser known in some cases. EDA provides money usually for infrastructure, but also some other economic development generating topics and programs. SBA, of course, Small Business Administration, mainly focused on startups for businesses and additional funding. Some big things with regard to grants themselves that we talk about in the planning world, trying to make sure you have internal capacity, building the story to help make the case of why this grant should be awarded to the community, making sure you've identified and assessed what the needs really are, looking at the entire universe of opportunities, and how you can start to layer resources, really being solid in your and thorough in your development of your application, your request for funding, and then how do you propose to maintain compliance and implement it if you're awarded. With that, typically one of the things we've talked about internally starting to try and work on is making sure we are, again, more forward thinking, trying to identify things up front. And if we may not be able to go after a grant in this current cycle, what can we do now to start being better prepared in the next go-around. Some of the other things that we as a community and others use, consultants often get employed by communities to do projects. The Community Development Department currently has 3 on retainer right now on contract for various projects: the Twin Lakes Master Plan, the Unified Development Code, and the Infill Housing Palette. Those were all done through an RFP, RFQ process, request for proposals, request for qualifications. The difference is the proposal asks for a price. The qualifications literally are saying, tell us what you can do and how you would address this problem that we have. Tell us your approach. Both are useful. And typically, what I tell communities when I'm walking through this discussion with them is if you include price, you make it no more than 10% of your selection criteria. So on a point scale of 1 to 100, it's no more than 10 points, and usually I recommend 5. So that the focus then becomes their approach, their background, and their team, because that's really what is you're hiring someone for at the end of the day. And then other outside resources there are at times available. In this state, we're fortunate to have Oklahoma University's Institute of Quality Communities. That's a resource and does work for communities on contract. The Landscape Architecture program at OSU does a number of projects in any given semester as well. So those are always 2 things we can tap into that you don't necessarily have in other places. We've been able to utilize a number of community groups like OSU's Extension to help with different discussion topics as we go through different programs as well, which has been a huge benefit. That is a very brief overview of some advanced tools and ways to help implement things. So at this point, we've walked through with you the legal basics of planning, role of planning commission, the comprehensive plan, and then some advanced tools. So if there are other topics or things you want to come back to and dive in more, please let us know. We're happy to walk through that. I know at the Oklahoma Municipal League annual meeting this fall, our staff will be involved in 2 different sessions presenting planning and zoning topics. One will be on zoning, subdivision regulations, and zoning overlay districts. The other will be on the basics, the legal basics of planning, like the role of the Planning Commission and Board of Adjustment. Any questions about any of this material I can answer? Okay. I know one member had asked if they could get a hard copy, and we will make that available for you for the next meeting.
Ryan, is the Municipal League Conference something that we should try to attend?
It could be useful. I know that you'll see typically elected officials, you'll see city staff from different municipalities. Another option that could be available that might be better suited for planning commission members would be in the spring with the Oklahoma chapter of the American Planning Association or the State Planning Association Conference. That probably will have a session like this, either for a half a day or a whole day type situation. So you could walk through these and bring your questions and go more in depth. I know they did a session like this with these types of topics for a half day last spring in Enid, and one of our staff was involved in that session. It had a pretty good turnout. We packed all of the things that you've walked through over the last few months into about 3.5 hours. So it goes fast. I know our staff has been involved with the Municipal League in doing an all-day session like this as well, so that could be a potential opportunity as well. I know the league is looking also at doing a full-blown citizen planner type of training certification that would involve all of these topics. So thank you for helping be those guinea pigs.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right.
All right, the next item is number 4, community development updates.
Well, welcome. If you haven't figured out, we are live today. So for those that will watch this or watching now, thank you for being a part of this. The plan is, as we go forward, to try and put these meetings live, and then it'll be available on the city's YouTube channel so that we offer more transparency. And since you are one governing, or one advisory board, I should say, to the governing body that meets regularly, the idea was to start with you and add the other advisory bodies in as they are active, and it warrants. As far as other topics going on, I mentioned some of the consultant work. We are giving back comments on the sign portion of the development code. We've done an internal review and handed our first set of edits back, and then a second set. So we'll be getting those revisions made. We're also doing a lot of work between the development code and the Twin Lakes master plan to make sure things mesh well between the two so that there's not a conflict. There's been a lot of internal discussions and then chats with the consultants on both projects about that. We are doing an internal review of the next set of prototypes for the infill housing palette as well. We were given the other 5 prototypes and asked to make some choices about some things. And so we have a range of housing sizes, some that are a 3-bed, 2-bath combinations, some that are much smaller. But I will tell you, the staff that has provided comments already is, one of my staff put it, I'm pretty jazzed about seeing all this. And then we're using that as a springboard to have discussions with different community groups like Habitat for Humanity to see if this is a potential option they can begin to use as they start to become more active in the community. We are, through the Urban Redevelopment Authority, getting some interest in some of the city and Shura-owned lots, and working with one nonprofit that will be making a request to Shura and the City Commission to transfer 3 individual lots over for the idea of doing infill housing aimed at those with disabilities and or veterans. That's a specific thing that they do as a niche, as a nonprofit. So it fills an additional housing need in the community, although it's a small number of units. The Love Your Block program is doing their internal reviews for the mini grant projects. We have 3 residential ones that we'll be doing, as I mentioned before, and then a community-wide work day where those would get tackled, and then some other things. So we're still excited about getting that out in detail. As far as other projects, I've mentioned the Twin Lakes master plan and the cross communication, but the consultant is trying to wrap up their internal review and QA QC before they send it off to us for our internal review. And then I'm happy to say we have a final set of drafts for the design of the roof of the depot. And at this point, we're just starting to do a second round of internal review and then look at dates for bid letting in the fall, dependent upon a couple of other projects, specifically the roof at the senior center. So a lot very quickly, but I'd be happy to answer questions about those or any other projects we're working on.
So will the infill plans, should that help with some of the restoration and replacement after the tornado?
It could potentially help with that. It's also designed, the original intent, because we started this before the tornado,
Right.
Was to take the smaller lots that are more difficult to build on currently and make those more viable.
But the
And
tornadoes created some of those.
the tornadoes
smaller-
exacerbated the need for additional net housing, and highlighted the need for something like this on those smaller lots. We're also instituting a pilot project to do lien clearance for residential properties where we would pay to clear the liens off the property and you would sign title over to us, with the idea that we would turn around and try and get that back into occupancy if there's a structure on it, or get it built on to be occupied. We're also looking at trying to combine those tools with additional things like a down payment assistance program for owner-occupied housing. So additional tools we're trying to put in place, or as many of them as we can, to help with the housing situation in the community. But it certainly could help address that need, yes.
Can you speak a little bit to the meeting, the homeless meeting that's happening?
Oh, yes, I can. So there is a special call city commission meeting next Monday here in the chambers. It is a work session regarding the homeless program and where we're at right now and some of the challenges that are being dealt with and the community is facing. So it really is here's what each department is dealing with and what their role is, the challenges they have, and what their needs are. And then where the community fits in as far as property owners and the community as a whole. The Resource Center has been a great tool to help in some cases, but there's still additional things that we need, and so that'll be part of that discussion as well. But that will be here in the commission chambers on Monday evening.
What time?
It's a 6 o'clock start. Or what? Are we at 5? What?
I thought it was at 5:30.
It may be at 5:30. If I misspoke, I'm sorry.
The mayor was telling me about it yesterday. I thought he said 6.
It's 6 p.m.
Okay,
6
so 6 p.m. officially.
But check your local listings.
The agenda for that should be published soon, including the slides that staff will be speaking from. You will see different departments speak again about their aspects, whether it be code enforcement, fire, police, the homeless program, and then kind of again where we're at now, what we're dealing with, what the roles are, what we're trying to do next in terms of whether it be established camping areas or things to try and decrease the feeding operations that are not organized and often create more problems in the downtown area. What can be done to provide additional housing opportunity, things like that. But that will be the reason for the special call session on Monday, yes.
Great. Okay,
All right, thank you.
thank you. Next item is number 5, commissioners' comments. Commissioner Rowell? Commissioner Porter?
Glad to be back.
Glad to have you back.
I have a question that's been presented to me by some people is that as we are slowly recovering, some things will not be repaired, replaced, whatever. What's going to happen? How is that going to be handled through the city? Is a fence that's down and it's just left down, or a house that has been damaged and just left down?
Eventually, if it becomes a nuisance and a code enforcement issue, we'll go with each property through that process. Obviously, we've done some of that already. It will really come down to a case-by-case basis. Okay. I can tell you from the city's side, we're looking at roughly from a couple weeks ago, the tally was around $9 million alone just from debris removal, and then around $18 million just in damages to public buildings or public facilities. And again, that does not count residential properties, which will be far greater, or commercial areas. And while a number of residential property owners have been very diligent and trying to do repairs very quickly, we're still continuing to see many of them as they get into it realize the depth and the extent of the damage that goes beyond what you can initially see, in the first days or weeks after the damage is done. So we have a lot of property owners dealing with some of that right now and having to make a lot of choices.
The public-owned estimate doesn't include schools, though, right? That's schools
No,
are-
that's just city
Just city-owned.
property,
Wow.
city-owned properties.
I know everybody is just overwhelmed with what they're dealing with.
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Just always thank you for what you guys are doing. It's exciting to see a lot of work happening something in one of the committees that I'm on the Built Environment Committee. One of the things they've been talking about is trees. Like, that's one of the things that will never be the same in our community. And so they're working with like the OSU Extension Office and other grant opportunities to try and bring in like Oklahoma native trees and opportunities for people to get trees back in their areas too. So that's going to be something that's exciting to see over time and completely necessary as we rebuild in our community too.
So it won't clear any more rat pairs.
Only in your yard.
Have you contacted the Audubon Society?
Do what?
Have you contacted Audubon?
I don't know.
Audubon is probably one of the better organizations at providing kind of that repair piece back to communities. I know some communities in Alabama and other places that just lost tons of, I can't remember the community in Iowa that lost, I think it's over 100,000 trees.
Cedar Rapids.
Cedar Rapids was essential in helping to repair that process. So you might contact them.
Okay.
The group from the Pogo Built Environment community has been working, I know, with the Arbor Day Foundation.
Arbor Day's another one, yeah.
And that Arbor Day is the group that worked with
Actually,
Cedar Rapids.
Arbor Day is who I was thinking of, not the
Okay.
Audubon. We do both of those at the house. Arbor Day is who I was thinking of. Okay, yeah. Audubon, you'll just get a bunch of pretty prints. Arbor Day, you get trees.
Commissioner Barrett?
Nothing from me.
Okay. Well, I'm thrilled about the live stream and televising. I think it's just, as you said, another layer of our being open and transparent, and I'm all for it. So hope everybody in the gallery and online are appreciating it. All right, well, the last item is number 6, and that's adjournment. So I'm adjourning the meeting at 2:07.